well, we've finally kind of made it, I guess. The 40th anniversary or thereabouts of the Commodore 64's release. While some might have gone out of their way to celebrate a little earlier than expected, I feel that, being the end of August, and that August in 1982 was when the machine first hit shelves in the US, I feel it's apt to do this now. I got to admit, I'm actually not really sure how this is going to go. I did sort of plan out another different version of the video, but it was kind of inspired by what I did for the Spectrum earlier in the year, and, well, that didn't quite meet the objectives I had. So, because 2022 has gone from what should have been a good year to a bit of a, at least for me personally, I think I'm just going to take a step back and indulge in a little personal reflection. So I'm just going to really revisit what makes the machine special to me all these years later, and a bit of personal background with it, and go on from there. Being someone who is more or less the same age as the Commodore 64 itself, well, it puts it in a weird place because a lot of the experiences I've had with the machine, especially back in the day, don't really correspond to the way that many others experienced it. I mean, I didn't ask for it as a present for Christmas or anything. We picked it up off a relative as a sort of a hand-me-down kind of deal later on, by which point the decline had started. And for a lot of my childhood years, a lot of the way I got games was through color tapes. I did get the occasional commercial big release for a birthday or something, but those were few and far between. A lot of the times I was borrowing stuff off other people and playing games off the cover tapes from Zap and Commodore format. There was, of course, the programming bug, and I spent a lot of time in my local library borrowing various programming books and typing them in, and that is ultimately where the itch started that got me doing what I do now as a programmer. It kind of, sort of solidified that, and I think that accessibility is something I probably wouldn't have had I started out computing on a 16-bit machine or a PC or whatever. You just don't flip it on, power it up, and get the basic prompt. You end up in an OS or something, and that immediate accessibility, I think, sparked the curiosity for me to dig up the manual and read through, and eventually start reading those books from the library and go on from there. And of course, in some ways I've actually have written things on the machine that are deliberately terrible. And perhaps one day I'll get around to doing something properly there. There's always been the itch to want to write something there, but it's always a challenge. So for me, it's ultimately really been a games machine primarily. I mean, sure, I did do some homework on it in high school years, but it wasn't long before we had to accede to the march of progress and get a family PC, so there wasn't much. But of course, I do remember ploughing my way through GEOS, writing reports in GeoWrite, and messing about with GeoPaint and other programs in the suite. GEOS really was an amazing piece of technology for the time. But of course, running it on a stock Commodore 64 with a single disk drive and a joystick was probably not the most effective way you could use it. I mean, you could sit there and get used to preparing work disks and juggling floppies all the time, but really, if you wanted to use GEOS properly, you needed to have a whole bunch of expansions. And whilst I'm lucky today that thanks to devices like the 1541 Ultimate family, I can sort of do that, there's something that's still a bit weird about it, I'll admit. Though I have fondness for those days, that's the kind of stuff I don't really want to go back to. I would much rather be in front of a modern machine using modern suites to do my work, when I need to write that stuff up or write scripts or whatever. But really, it's about the games for me. And there's just so many that I've played over the years, whether they're the all-time classics or the ones that I kind of appreciate but others don't, or the ones that we could all universally agree are kind of naffing parts that really inspired me, both for the kind of things I want to play, but also for the things I kind of want to make. And it's something I really love about the Commodore 64, at least compared to its other 8-bit counterparts. You've got this sort of whole global dynamic here. You know, you look at machines like the Spectrum, and it's really confined to the UK and Spain, for where the majority of its catalogue came out. You know, the Atari 8-bits and Apple II were really American focused. Case with the Ataris, there were some games that were coming out of Europe. It wasn't quite balanced the way it was with the Commodore 64. So we got the RPGs, the strategy games, the adventures, the simulations from the US, you know, companies like Origin and Microprose and SSI. But then, of course, we go over to Europe, and not just the UK, like some of those other machines, but a large chunk of Europe, and we've got, you know, stuff coming out of Germany and Finland and the Netherlands and so much more. And I think it gives you that kind of thing where those European experiences, the really big names tended to be more action-packed and more frantic, and really push the hardware much further than what you got out of the US. Though, of course, the US stuff was much larger in scope, but really there was sort of that focus on being a little more detailed, a little more in-depth. And it's one of the things that's great now is that I can go back and appreciate both of them. You know, if I go through the collection of games I've acquired over the last decade or so, there's a mix of stuff of these simulators and RPGs from the US, but also more of the action stuff that I love from Europe. And I really feel that that kind of is what the Commodore 64 is in general, sort of the all-rounder. Yes, other machines are more powerful. Other machines can do more colours. They can do more sprites. They have better disk systems. There's so much more that those other machines can offer, and I love many of them for their distinct reasons. But there's just something about the Commodore 64 and how it was balanced technologically that really makes it a great all-round machine. At least for entertainment. I know someone's going to probably pop up in the comments and go, why didn't you think of X machine for work? And I'll admit, a lot of my nostalgia is from games playing. I didn't really get involved much with demo watching as a kid. Mostly, I'll admit, a lot of my experiences, my formulative experiences, were kind of solitary ones after a while. I mean, a lot of the games I enjoy most are single-player only games. A lot of times I really got into them, it was just me with no one else playing around. So, I guess that kind of sums in some of the weird things I have about nostalgia as a concept. You know, there are some people who feel their version of history or whatever is the one true one. And I'll admit, it's kind of why I think I struggle with some aspects of some of the community stuff. Like, I never touched a BBS, or I never went to a copy party because I was too young. It really makes doing a lot of this stuff really weird at points, and maybe it's just the after effect of nearly 3 years of this whole global situation we're in that has kind of made me feel some of those things again of like wanting to force myself out and really feeling that there's not much there, and perhaps withdrawing and enjoying this stuff in my own company is best. I mean, I actually really enjoyed when working out what I was going to do for this video, just having the computer set up in my Site B, as I call it, plugged into Capture Gear, and just playing stuff. I sat down to play things unencumbered by what I needed to play. I just played some stuff that I enjoyed, both some of those games I really love from back in the day, and some naff ones, and others that had some sort of connection, and it felt good. And I guess maybe that's just a sign of where things are going to go. I don't know how else to put it. I guess that's it. Like, as a platform, the Commodore 64 was the entry point for me to really learn about computers. And this, you know, By this point, we didn't have computers in my school. We got them just after, various kinds of Apple IIs, but I never really felt the connection to them. I guess because I never really got to read those manuals or really play around with BASIC or whatever it was, run some educational software and play an occasional game. And, might have had friends of the family and relatives with other machines, but never really got to see much of those in action outside of playing games there as well. I think that's just one of those experiences. And a lot of when I did teach myself to program, a lot of it was self-taught. So I think it's been an interesting solitary experience. But from there, like I said, it got my interest piked in programming, and that's really set up what I wanted to do professionally. And I'll always be thankful for it for that. I don't think I would have fell down this path had I started out on another machine, because my experience in schooling was that programming wasn't really a thing, even when I was in high school. So a lot of that interest in wanting to write code for myself really had to be picked up from myself. And again, I think it's always given me that appreciation of the global nature of video games. Like I've said earlier, the more action-focused fare we got from European developers and publishers versus the more cerebral fare that I think is best putting it for what came out of the US. Yeah, I know there was a lot of more action-focused stuff early on in the US, at least before the crash that happened there in 83 or so, but really a lot of the long-lasting stuff I think of for the C64 from American developers and publishers tends to be that cerebral, those RPG games, those simulations and all. But really, it's a machine that it still just feels incredibly special, and it's always been exciting to see new developments coming out over the years. We've had some amazing new productions on the games front, and even more to come. Watching as tidbits come out of new projects in the works. Some of those really exciting ones are going to be utterly groundbreaking, especially when we see developers who are making things that actually push the machine further than we've seen before. I think it was Gates of the Ancient from last year that was one that kind of scratched the itch for that for me, seeing a 3D space combat game for the first time in probably since the likes of Space Rogue. So that's, 32 years or so, just going off the back of a napkin. So I guess there's not much else for me to say, really. It's been nice to just sort of take a step back and reflect. 2022's been a bit of a year for me, like I sort of pointed out earlier. And just taking a bit of time to sit in front of my favourite 8-bit micro, to realise why it's my favourite 8-bit micro after all this time, probably did me a load of good. And so this probably isn't the kind of video you're expecting. You're probably expecting something longer, more detailed, or whatever. But really, there's not much else for me to say than, here's to you, Commodore 64. Here's for 40 years of great games and experiences and whatever else. And even though my own time with you has not quite been that full 40 years, you've had enough of an impact on me regardless. And so for you watching this, there's not much else more for me to say than thank you very much for watching.